I love the Silmarillion. Its myths and legends are essential reading for Tolkien fans. However, there are several glaring problems with the Silmarillion, or at least with the Silmarillion as published. In this video, I'm going to explain what those problems are and share some ideas for how to fix them. Before we get started, make sure to click the subscribe button and notify bell to stay up to date on all of the content we release on the Tolkien Road. Hey there, fellow travelers, John here from the Tolkien Road. It's no secret, for most fans of Tolkien, their first experience with the Silmarillion is one of overwhelm and confusion. And it's not their fault. While I truly love the Silmarillion, there's no doubting that it's a flawed book. And I'm not alone in considering it a flawed book. Christopher Tolkien himself expressed disappointment with the finished product. In fact, several years after its publication, he said the Silmarillion as published was in no way a completion. In a way, the entire History of Middle-earth series serves as a compilation of endnotes to the Silmarillion, tracing its development through the course of J.R.R. Tolkien's life. Suffice to say, you know the Silmarillion is a difficult work when fans who relish every detail of The Lord of the Rings find it immensely challenging. After all, thousands of Tolkien fans, like myself, have attempted it over the years and, well... You shall not pass! Here are 3 things that make the Silmarillion a challenging work, and what I'd do to fix them. The stories of Middle-earth take place within a vast imaginary world called Arda. In The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, we become familiar with a sizable portion of this world, in large part thanks to the detailed maps that are included within the books. In fact, I'd argue that The Lord of the Rings would be significantly harmed without its maps, because the maps are a huge boon to grounding the action of the story and lending it the verisimilitude or impression of reality that Tolkien so desired. While the Silmarillion contains a map, there are a few major problems with this map. First, it doesn't actually apply to the Silmarillion until you are about halfway into it. The book's first half is presented without any sort of visual reference. Thus, for all of the action taking place in the blessed realm of Aman, we have no visual reference to fix our minds to. Second, the book's first half takes place over an even larger area than that of The Lord of the Rings, and this area is in a constant state of flux. Thus, even as you're trying to keep track of locations like Almarin, Tol Eressëa, and Cuiviénen, the world is altered and new locales come into being. My suggestion for fixing this would be to create an appendix of maps in a future edition of the Silmarillion. Essentially, create a visual rendering of the world of Arda at each stage of development, and indicate what chapters or years it applies to. In the meantime, I recommend picking up a copy of Karen Wynne Fonstad's The Atlas of Middle-earth, which I've linked to in the notes. Though a bit dated at this point, it's a very useful and well-compiled reference for the evolving world of Arda. The Lord of the Rings is commonly referred to as an epic because it encompasses dozens of characters and numerous narrative threads taking place over vast distances, all culminating in one grand story. While the same could be said of the Silmarillion, it doesn't really work in the same way. While it's true that the Silmarillion culminates in one unified and grand finale, its individual parts were not necessarily crafted to cohere in quite the same way as the various aspects of The Lord of the Rings. In fact, I'd liken the Silmarillion to something more like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We get pockets of loosely connected action focusing on varying protagonists and antagonists, like the Captain America and Iron Man sub-franchises, and in some cases a number of these threads come together for a massive event, a la the Avengers films. The truth is that Tolkien considered stories like The Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, and The Fall of Gondolin to be individual epics all their own. Each one was a novel-length story in his mind. Thus, the Silmarillion can often give the impression of trying to cover too much ground in a relatively short space, and it's easy to lose track of all of the various threads along the way. And consider this as well. Hobbits are a massive reason The Lord of the Rings works and is so popular. After all, hobbits provide an everyman vantage point for the average reader to enter into a world that is vastly different from ours. Tolkien himself recognized this as a massive stumbling block when it came to the Silmarillion. What I propose for a future edition of the Silmarillion is the construction of what's called a frame narrative. A frame narrative is a simple outer story that encompasses and introduces the main story. An example that many people are familiar with is the film The Princess Bride. The main narrative of Wesley and Buttercup versus the evil Prince Humperdinck is introduced and made more relevant to the viewer via the funny and sweet outer narrative of the grandfather reading his sick grandson the Wesley, Buttercup, Humperdinck story from a book. And here's what's cool. Tolkien actually envisioned a frame for the Silmarillion from the very beginning. If we go back and look at the Book of Lost Tales, which was Tolkien's early version of the collection of stories we now know as the Silmarillion, we discover that he provided a frame from the outset. Now, while it's interesting, I won't go into the details of that original frame narrative in this video. But essentially, it involved a traveler from a distant land visiting Tol Eressëa and meeting people who told him the various myths and legends that we now know as the Silmarillion. So here's my question. Why not construct a frame for the Silmarillion that involves familiar characters like Bilbo, Frodo, Sam, Aragorn, Elrond, Gandalf, and so many others relating the stories of the Silmarillion? Perhaps from Rivendell, perhaps from the Blessed Realm. It would serve to introduce the stories in a much more relatable and contextualized way, and in my view, it's completely in keeping with Tolkien's own style and vision for his legendarium. Tolkien greatly wrestled with chronology when he was writing Lord of the Rings. Everything from reasonable distances traversed to the phases of the moon mattered to him, because he desired for Lord of the Rings to deliver the impression of reality to the reader. While the Lord of the Rings mostly takes place over a period of time shorter than a year, the Silmarillion takes place over thousands of years. So why didn't we get a helpful timetable of events in the appendix of the Silmarillion? It might surprise you to learn that Tolkien actually constructed a timetable for the events of the Silmarillion, and that they are vastly detailed. This seems like one of the easiest updates that could be made to the Silmarillion. Provide us with a tale of years like the one we get at the end of Lord of the Rings. After all, it's already out there. In the History of Middle-earth series, we can actually see the development of the tale of years for the Silmarillion over the course of Tolkien's lifetime. We aren't talking about making up something from scratch, but instead of using what Tolkien has already given us to make the Silmarillion more easily digestible. In the end, I say these things because I want more readers to become familiar with and come to love the stories of the Silmarillion. The truth is, it's not that the Silmarillion is boring or too challenging for the average reader. It's just that it's constructed in such a way that it makes it difficult to get started on it. My hope is that a future edition of the Silmarillion will provide some significant updates to the book, and thereby give all Tolkien fans a way to enjoy it more thoroughly. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, please contribute to the work of the Tolkien Road via Patreon, which is linked to in the notes below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, the road goes ever on.